Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. Getting much closer now to being able to start on the butcher block countertop, but I definitely need one more thing, and that is a much better way of holding down the work than this. This is something I've been using, well, it's just an offcut from my scrap bin for a lot of different jobs, and I mentioned it in a few videos already. I need a much better hold down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together one that's going to be really good for the long thin strips I'm going to need for the butcher block. But I also want it to be generic enough that I can use it for, obviously, for ongoing projects. So I'm going to start off with an L shape like this. I'm going to make it a 3/4 because I want it nice and solid. And I also want to attach it to the back rail, so this will be nice and firm. And as always in these projects, I'm going to try and use as much of my scrap bin as possible, if nothing else, just to keep it from growing too large, and, as always, trying to keep the price down. So the strips are going to be 16 inches each in their length. So the reason for that length is because it gives a nice pattern, and also there won't be too much wastage for where I have to cut out for the sink. So that kind of works nicely, and 16 inches is a good number for like a generic hold down for future projects. It's going to cover a good 3/4 of this saw sled, and that should be more than enough. So now, as far as the L goes, I want it to be slightly lower than the back rail. You see this one here goes evenly with it, and I use a clamp to hold it in place. But the one I'm going to be making is most likely going to be handheld, and even if it isn't handheld, I am going to need to clamp it down. I need a spot where my hand can go, so this L shape has to be below that. I came up with 5 inches just by fiddling with my fingers on this and seeing how much would be a comfortable grip and that sort of stuff, and it turned out to be the best. This part of the build is very straightforward. It's a simple matter of cutting, well, roughly 16 inches, and I'm going to trim that down to size. And then, of course, deciding on how much of the L is going to be, the bottom part of the L. And I fiddled around again for a little bit as far as trying to get something that is relatively stable, because it is going to slide back and forth and be lifted up and down and all that stuff. So it needs to, have a little bit of give in it, but long enough that that give isn't going to translate into any kind of wobble. So I came up with, after a little bit of testing, 7 inches. So this one's going to be, as you can see, just trimmed down now to 16 inches. And now this piece here is going to be the 7 inches. Now I want to make sure it is the same, the same for the whole thing, so it's uniform. And what I'm going to do now is just cut that off. This is part of the fiddling I was doing. I was just seeing what it was like. And now, 7 inches is perfect, fine. And now I'm going to cut one for the L, and then we're going to put the L together. And then the next part is actually the tricky bit, and that is coming up with the, basically an inverted U. It's going to slide down over the back rail, and that is going to allow me to slide this back and forth, lift it up and down, and adjust it for whatever I need as far as holding something down. And that's, like I said, that part's going to be what's going to take a little bit more effort. This here, of course, is, like I said, very straightforward. I'm going to cut this piece here, and then I'm going to use a corner clamp and just hold it in place. That's it. Just 2 screws. Not bothering to glue this because, again, this is 3/4 inch plywood. It's overkill. It's definitely more than I need for this, and it'll be more than solid enough. And like I said, it's just something I want to make sure that it is held properly and has enough rigidity, because 16 inches away from where it's going to be held, I want it to be able to withstand any kind of pressure that the saw blade will put on it. But also, I'm going to put not a hand guard, I'm going to put a face guard on this, really, so no chips will fly up, and also because it's going to be transparent, that'll be in part 2, it will give me a place where I can also put my hand a little bit further along on the 16 inches, so to make sure that I have as much hold down force as I need. So I haven't attached the L together yet, but what I'm going to do here is I'm moving on to cutting the pieces for what's going to be the inverted U. This is going to be what's going to hang onto the back part of this, like here, and, well, not like, one's going to be on the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of playing cards, and I'm going to place them in between each on both sides. And I'm going to clamp it down nice and hard, and going to be able to then again screw on the top piece. So I'm going to slide it down in here. It takes a bit of fiddling. I'm going to leave this at regular speed, and I'm not going to speed it up at all. Just so you can see, there's a bit of, like I said, finicky work here. The inside one is easy because it is resting right on the bottom, the saw slit, so it's easy to hold in place. But even still, the card slipped down, I think, once or twice during all this, and then it's a matter, of course, of getting them both in rough position, and then clamping down a little bit with one other clamp, making some adjustments, and then, of course, putting another clamp on, take the first clamp off, and make the fine adjustments on that as well. So I'm going to use a square here just to make sure that they're even. That's mostly for aesthetics. It's not really important as far as the function of it goes. The most important part, of course, is making sure that there's enough space in between each of those two verticals that this will slide nicely without giving too much slide. And playing cards are just easy to do. They're relatively, probably could have done this with a couple of pieces of paper or almost anything really for that matter, but cards are stiff enough that this can be done quite easily. So I'm going to just put a little bit of pressure on this initially, get it in place. Then I'm going to start working on the other end here and get that roughly positioned, and I'm going to tap it down gently with the mallet because it's kind of difficult to do this with hands because it's harder to give a nice light touch to it, whereas a light tap with a mallet is much simpler for fine adjustments like that. And then once I have this side done and getting it basically exactly where I need it, it'll be very easy to do the other side. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention when I cut these pieces, you're going to see, actually I don't, you can see from this distance, but I cut them so that they were a thickness of my square thicker than I needed. So when I'm doing what you saw there, I am not only just making it square to each other, it's nice and level as well. So this is going to turn to be relatively level and square, which is kind of nice. And now that I have two clamps in place here, it is very easy to take one off, make a few adjustments. So you put the top on, you can see just a little bit of a wiggle in that. So the right hand side, from my perspective, they're as close to the screen here. That side still needs to be slightly adjusted, so I'm going to take that clamp off, and I'm going to do the same thing to this side as I did to the other side. And you can see it was a bit of a finicky job, but the end result was really nice. I'm very happy with it. One of the things I am unfortunately not really going to show too much is I clamped this down quite solid while I was doing this, but when it came to actually making the measurements and drilling the holes and putting the top cap on, I backed those off. I didn't want, obviously, to squeeze these down super tight, and of course by doing so end up not ending up with any wiggle room at all. So I'm going to put this on now, and again, I did that off camera. I don't always end up recording everything, unfortunately. Sometimes I actually just forget to turn the camera on. I think in part 2 something like that's going to come up as well. Anyway, it doesn't really matter that much. So right now is I'm going to be a little bit more accurate than I need to be for putting these holes in. But I want to make sure that I don't have any, if I cut too close to one side, like when I put the screws in, if they're too close to one side, I could end up with a bit of pucker there, and that could easily ruin how this slides. So what I've done here is, you see, if you look right underneath my hand there's a bit of overhang still because I hadn't cut this down to size. I left that overhang there deliberately because I can trim it afterwards just in case there is a bit of movement in this, and I can make it as flush as possible. No real need to do this other than it will fit nicely in the hand, and of course aesthetically it'll look a little bit better. But I am using offcuts for this, so it's not really that important. So I'm going to hold this down relatively tightly now that I've got everything marked out where I need it to be. I'm going to make sure it's flush on one side. I'm going to drill one hole and put the screw in, and then that'll act as my clamp for doing the rest of them. So it is quite straightforward, and I am taking a bit of pains here just to make sure that the little drill bit is precisely where I need it to be. And of course I put a little bit of countersink on that just to make sure that these are going to be flush with the top. Now one thing that's going to happen during this, which is really annoying, plywood is not as good quality as it used to be. I find there's an awful lot of voids in them. And sometimes what you do when you're putting something like this in is you hit a soft spot. In other words, somewhere underneath in one of those plies where you can't see it at all, there's a gap, and it's not obviously as sturdy on that particular spot as it would be in any of the other spots. And that happens once here. I end up putting this on, and there you go. That is just so irritating. That screw is sunk a lot deeper, and all it really does is just ruin the aesthetics a little bit. Not really that important, I suppose, but I was taking a fair amount of care of making this, and to hit something like that is just irritating. And there you go. That slides nicely. I really am happy with that. And now it's a simple matter of getting this all set up for attaching this. That will be in part 2. This video is getting quite long, and I didn't want it to go to like 25-30 minutes. So in part 2, I'll put on the acrylic cap, attach this, and get everything ready for you. So thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, let me know what you think about all this, and I'll see you in the next video, and bye for now.